Hey everyone, welcome back to an artistic interview. Today I am joined by the illustrious Greg Farshtey. You may know him from his many years working at LEGO, especially on projects such as Bionicle and Ninjago. Welcome.
Thank you.
It's great to have you here. Yeah, this is going to be a pretty casual format, just kind of going through your entire journey as like a writer and an author. We've had many struggles along the way, I'd imagine, many successes, in sort of just describing your pathway and
Mhm.
anything that people should know. So yeah, why don't you start by telling us, for the few folks who might not know who you are, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Well, my name is Greg Farshtey. I spent 22 years working at Lego. My real title was editorial director, but the title they gave me in the last few years was creative manager specialist. I don't know what that means. Nobody else knows what that means either. Um, but basically, my day job was writing the magazine, writing for the app, writing for the website. That's what I was originally hired to do, but then I also ended up doing the Bionicle comic, the Bionicle chapter books, 11 of the Ninjago graphic novels, some Hero Factory books, some other stuff. And before that, I had been in direct marketing. I had done 7 years in role playing game design, and I had done probably 3 years, I think, 3 or 4 years in journalism before I did that. So, the reason I got the Lego job was basically that I had the combination of direct marketing experience and the game design experience, and they figured the two of them together they'd be able to get more out of me than they originally were looking for, because they were originally just looking for somebody to write the magazine. But
Mm,
realizing I had the direct marketing experience, and at that time the magazine was under Lego Direct, they figured I could also work on the catalogs. I could also work on stuff like that. So I think my first day there, I was writing a New York Times print ad.
oh wow.
So, you know, um, especially in the early years, it was great because you'd come in, you had no idea what you were going to be doing. I mean, one day I came in and they're like, "Oh, we need you to write the lyrics for the song for the animatronic band at FEO Schwartz.
Wow.
Here's the music." It was like, and it was great. That was the kind of stuff you got to do. It was terrific.
Yeah, I can definitely imagine that being a place where, creative folks can really thrive. And obviously, like, you were responsible for like a massive part of Bionicle's like direction and story writing.
Yeah.
And not only that, I believe you continued to answer questions about the lore and the world building for about, I want to say, like 10 years after it ended, maybe more.
Uh, well, yeah. I mean, I was answering on BZ Power for quite a long time, and then they told us we couldn't do that anymore. And so then I was answering on the Lego message boards for a while, and then they shut those down. And so that was kind of that. But at the peak, when Bionicle was active, I was answering about 500 questions a day.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah,
Was this
it
like
was fun.
a part of your job duties or something that you did for the
No,
community?
no, no. I mean, I didn't get paid for it or anything. It was just something I did on my own because it was fun. The reason we started doing it, or I started doing it, was because in 2003, when the first movie was coming out, there was a big rumor among the fans that Bionicle was ending at
Hmm.
the end of the year, and we didn't want people to think that, because then why buy the movie if you think that the franchise is ending? So basically,
Right.
I went on there to start correcting misinformation that it was ending, and I ended up just staying on there, and it was really good for me as a writer because I could see, okay, they love this, they don't love that. This part they're really not clear about, so
Hmm.
we need to be more clear about that part. Um, you know, Here's some questions that I didn't think of, about things, and it was like having a focus group every day.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was definitely a part of that focus group. I would ask a lot of questions on the message boards because I had a lot of interest in like writing stories in the Bionicle universe. So I always really appreciated that. Like it felt so like intimate being able to just like chat with the writer of like all these books I had obsessively read, and
Hmm.
getting to like be a part of the community. Yeah, that was awesome.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. It was good. I think it was good for both sides in that. So it never felt like work. It
Mm.
never felt like, oh, I have to do this today. It was something I got something out of.
Yeah. What was your first what was your experience like when you first kind of like got on brought on to the Bionicle project? I mean, was it like very
Well,
immediate or?
no, what happened with Bionicle was I joined the company late in 2000.
Hmm.
So the initial story Bible was already written, the sets were designed, they already were, planning this thing. And I read the story Bible, and most of it I loved. Some of it I thought was kind of dumb, like the haka dances
Hmm.
was dumb. And I said, I'm not doing that. There's no way we're doing that. But I wasn't on the team, I wasn't involved at all in anything. And they decided they were going to do a comic.
Hmm.
And Colin Gillespie, who was working on the marketing end of things, who was a terrific marketer, said, "We want this to be authentic. We're going to work with DC. We want it to look like a real comic book. We really want this to feel like an authentic thing." Um, and they had a writer in New York lined up to do it, who was friends with somebody on the web team. And I was bummed, but I also said, "Hey, I just started here. I can't expect I'm going to get handed, something like this to do when I've been here for 5 minutes."
Sure.
So I started writing a script just because I'd never written one before. And I just wanted to see what the formatting was like and, how do you do this? So one day my boss came in and I said, "Oh, by the way, I did like 3 or 4 pages of this just for fun, just, to see what it would be like." And she goes, "Well, that's good because we need to have the first issue out and approved for March."
Hmm.
So they basically needed it written in like 2 weeks.
Wow.
And the guy in New York couldn't do that. It was originally not supposed to be out until May, which is when the US sets were coming out. But they decided they wanted to have the first issue for March when the European sets came out. So that's how I got to do it, was just because the New York guy was busy.
Yeah,
Um,
having you there was very lucky for them then.
and then, it just went from there. I just did all of them then. I was very, very fortunate not only to work with a lot of really good artists, but to work with a guy named Marty Pasco, who
Hmm.
was my editor at DC. And I had grown up reading Marty's comics.
Wow.
And so it was a great thrill for me to work with a guy that had written Superman, you know. And he was the nicest guy you ever want to meet in your life. And
Hmm.
unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago, but
No.
very, very good guy. And I learned a lot from him and from the artists that I work with about just layout, panel layout. Like you don't have to show A happening and then B happening. You can show A and B happening in the same panel.
Hmm.
Um, and my attitude was always like, you're the artist, you know your job. If you're telling me that this is how it should be done, then do it that way because you know what you're doing.
Hmm.
You're a professional. My favorite Marty story is actually in 2002, early in the year, we went to Toys R Us in Times Square.
Hmm. Oh wow.
This is when the Bo Rock were out,
Ah.
and we did a comic signing. Myself, Marty, Carlos Deanda, Randy Elliott,
Hmm.
and it was really exciting. And they got 1,200 kids. They didn't expect anywhere near that many kids. It was a mob scene. They got 1,200 kids, and so I'm sitting next to them, and Marty turns to the artist and he goes, "Enjoy this because you're never going to see this many kids in anything you do ever again." But yeah, that was a trip. That was a trip. That was one of the real highlights of working on Bionicle for me was that. Um,
Yeah.
but Marty was a terrific guy to work with, and it was a real honor to be associated with him.
Yeah. I mean, the passion for Bionicle was off the charts. I mean, everyone was talking about it. And I think a massive part of that was like the story behind it, like the lore and the characters. Because, there were a ton of like Lego sets that I think around that time, none of them were really narrative based. At least none of them to the extent of
No,
Bionicle
Lego
was
had
anyway.
really never done that before. And at the time that Bionicle came out, Lego was really hurting
Hmm.
sales wise. And after Bionicle came out, I remember we had some toy industry expert come speak to us, and he said, Bionicle is cool, Lego is not cool. Maybe that's on purpose.
Hmm.
But that was the situation. And it was a weird situation because the US, top to bottom, was very supportive of Bionicle from the very beginning because this had quite a big marketing budget all the
Hmm.
way through.
Hmm.
So you needed that support. But Denmark was kind of iffy on it because it
Really?
wasn't traditional Lego.
Hmm.
Even though it was Technic, it wasn't traditional Lego. They didn't do action figures. They didn't do story-based things like this. It wasn't Lego City, you know.
Hmm.
And I think that there was a certain amount of maybe discomfort in that it basically saved the company and it wasn't
Hmm.
traditional Lego. Um, and in fact, I think it was 2, 3 years later. This was the only time I ever ran into this in the U.S. We were talking about some event we were going to do for Bionicle, and one of the events people said, "Oh, aren't kids tired of this?"
Hmm.
And I said, "No, you're tired of it. They are not tired of it." Because don't forget, in those days, except for something like City, Lego didn't do things for more than 1 year.
Hmm. Oh yeah, yeah,
I mean, they put soccer out. Soccer sold like crazy and then ended after a year because that was the plan. It was going to end after a year.
yeah.
So to keep doing it year in, year out, year in, year out was not the normal business way to do things. They had a few
Hmm.
evergreen lines like City, but they didn't do that. Everything else was a year and out, you know. So there was always a certain amount of that we had to deal with. Um, and I think that's maybe part of the reason it got canceled was I think that there were probably some folks that just were waiting for the sales to slip enough that they could cancel it, even
Hmm.
though we had a 3 movie deal at the time and it was not the best time to do that.
Yeah, that was the
Um,
movie with the robot dinosaurs on Sirius Magna. There was like,
yeah, that was the plan for the second movie, or at least that was my plan for the second movie. We hadn't discussed it with the story team yet, so I don't know if we would have done that or not, but that was what I had thought we were going to do. Yeah, I was supposed to do, I had been told that I was going to do the screen treatment for the other 2 movies. So when they canceled it, I lost $20,000 in like 35 seconds.
oh my
So,
goodness, damn.
and I just bought a house
Oh,
and you know, like a month before, and they're like, "Up, we're canceling it." I'm like, "You flew
devastating.
us to Denmark to tell us you're canceling it? What? You would have emailed me that,
This
you
meeting could
know?"
have been an email. Yeah.
Jesus.
Oh my goodness. That's wild. Yeah, it definitely feels like there were a lot of strange decisions made with Bionicle. I mean, in terms of like the cancellation, but I mean, it had a pretty good run. I mean, like about 10 years of
Yeah.
continuous
Yeah.
storytelling.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, 9.5, something like that.
yeah.
Yeah.
How much of it was kind of planned from the beginning?
Well, the first few years, the overall plot basically came from Bob Thompson's head.
Hmm.
Bob had a vision. Um, Bob is the father of Bionicle, and
Hmm.
he had a vision of what he wanted to do with it, and that basically took us through, I would say, probably 2005.
Mm.
Um, and then he left the company. And so from '06 on, it was more of a story team coming up with the ideas. And that was myself, the web producer, the guys from Advance that did the graphics, the set designer, the marketing lead in Bill, and all working together. And it was a great situation. Somebody throw an idea out, somebody else would build on it, somebody
Mm.
else would build on that. So it wasn't any one person's ideas. It was everybody coming together and getting excited about it.
Hmm.
And usually we go into the story team meeting with some idea of what the sets were going to be
Hmm.
and some idea of what the environment was going to be based on the sets. And that was it. That's what we had. And then we come up with the main story. And the main story was usually good for, well, it depends. If you had a movie that year, the movie would be one book,
Hmm. Yeah.
and you might get one other book out of main story, but all the rest of it would have to be off story, which was pretty much my story.
Interesting.
Um, I mean, books like Time Trap,
Hmm.
which is my personal favorite
Love
of
that
all the
one.
books, just came out of me. That wasn't from a story Bible. That was just me doing that, and that was just to do a sidetrack here.
Hmm.
That was a reaction to what's called the law of diminishing villainy,
Okay.
which is a comic book thing. Basically, the more you trot out the big uber powerful villain and he gets beaten, the less of a threat he
Hmm.
seems to be.
Sure.
Um, and so what I wanted to do with Makuta was to set it up that he lets you win.
Hmm.
He lets you win because if you think you beat him, you're not paying attention to what he's actually doing.
Sure.
So he always had like 10 things going on at the same time. You'd see the obvious one and go, haha, and go beat him. And meanwhile, the stuff he really wanted to do, he was able to get away with doing. He
Interesting.
thought he was vanquished. That way, you didn't get that diminishing villainy because you never actually beat the guy.
Hmm.
I wanted to add that he's playing chess and the Toe are playing checkers
Hmm.
aspect. And that's one of the I would say that's one of the two things that I contributed to Bionicle that made a difference.
Yeah, and I remember, in Time Trap, it's been a long time since I've read it, but it was very much like a battle of wits. It wasn't just, we're gonna beat the Makuta with the power of friendship. It's I'm gonna threaten to destroy the universe or the timeline with this hammer. If I destroy the Mask of Time or the Kanoe Vahi, which was I blew my mind when I read it when I was younger.
Yeah, well, it's funny because you can tell the difference between Bionicle and Hero Factory
Mm,
in the sense that I would take about 5, maybe 6 weeks to write a Bionicle book working on the weekends,
hmm.
and I would write a Hero Factory book in one weekend.
Really? Oh my
Yeah.
goodness.
Well, because Hero Factory had no characterization.
Yeah.
It had none. It was just plot. It was just plot, 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 plot. So I would take a couple of movies I like, smush them together, and make a Hero Factory book.
Yeah, there's
I
a bit
mean,
of
one of them one time. Yeah, I remember one of. I don't remember which one it was, but one of them was just Magnificent Seven and Night of the Living Dead put together. I know. I don't remember which one it was, but
Yeah, I was one of those people who felt very slighted by the existence of a Hero Factory after Bionicle's cancellation. I felt like what heroes like they're robots with little personalities inserted into them. Like that doesn't seem like where's my complex characters with deep,
yeah. Well, and
emotional
also
backstories.
you can't manufacture heroes.
Yeah, you can't
Doesn't
manufacture
make sense.
creativity
It
either.
flies it right in the face of everything that's ever been done. Basically, you can't just make. It's like saying you can make AI heroes. That's not going to
Ah,
work. You know, it's not going to work. You can't do that.
what a great microcosm of the horrible hell world where we find ourselves in today, of people trying to manufacture creativity and it just ending up being slop and
Yeah,
nonsense.
yeah.
But we'll get into that later. But yeah, back to the fun part, Bionicle. Um, you know, what were those kind of like meetings of the story team like? Like kind of throwing ideas out there and creativity. Do you have any like memories of like certain moments that were like, oh, this is you could like see the magic happening of people kind of coming together?
Uh, my memories, well, my more distinct memories tend to be fights.
Mm.
I mean, when they decided to wake up Montanui and move someplace completely different, I was 100% against it.
Really?
But they already made a decision, so I didn't have anything to do. And I remember a phone meeting with Bob, with me and Leah Weston, who was the web producer, where we were trying to talk him out of Valika going bad in
Mm.
2005. We did not feel that that matched his character. That this was somebody who was so thrilled to be a Toa. It had meant so much to him to be a Toa that to then have him turn around and be the one that goes bad made no sense at all to
Mm.
us. But Bob wanted to do it because he said it was part of the hero's journey. So, and he was the boss. So we had to do it. But yeah, we had a big fight about that. Um,
Mm.
and then when they did decide, okay, we're doing this Barra Magna story, I kind of weighed in with the idea of, okay, well, what if Maguta's plan all along was to take over the robot,
Mm.
and we could play that out, in the first year, and basically wrap the Makuta story up
Yeah.
uh, in the first year. And fortunately, with some changes, they went along with that. But um, that's where we went with that. But the thing I regret the most about it is that A, they canceled it because we could have been still telling stories today
Mm.
with Bionicle, and B, that the people who licensed it didn't realize it could still be a cash cow,
Yeah.
even with no toys. But the attitude was the toys on the shelves are free advertising, and if there's no toys on the shelves, then we don't want to do this.
Mm.
But and then when they did bring it back, they brought it back in a very half-hearted way.
Yeah. Uh,
Um,
2015
and
Bionicle
they
was fascinating. I don't.
and they canceled it before even a year was up. So
Mm.
because the whole thing, there were certain things that went into Bionicle from a marketing standpoint that they had from the beginning. The first one was, let's pretend that we didn't create this. Let's pretend this is a major motion picture that we have licensed. How would we handle it if we were just licensing this? And
Hmm.
that was how they approached the marketing of it. The other thing was, we're going to write this story and do this art and aim it at 11 and 12-year olds, and then hope that the 7 and 8-year olds will aspire up.
Hmm.
That was always the plan.
Yeah.
When they brought it back, it felt like they were aiming it at a much younger audience,
Yeah.
but you weren't going to get the older audience then, because the older kids are not going to aspire down.
Yeah.
And one of the marketing people I remember said to me at one point, he said, you can't aim at everybody. If you aim at everybody, you get nobody.
Hmm.
You can't please more than one audience. You're going to have to pick who your target audience is. And it worked for us because we aimed a story higher up, and the 8-year-old kids wanted to feel like they were grown up.
Yeah.
So got into it, you know? Um, And I remember, people at Lego saying to me, "Oh, was the story too complicated?" I'm like, "These kids can remember 600 Pokemon names. This is not too complicated for them. Kids can remember stuff like this because
Yeah.
they don't have all the clutter that adults have crowding their brains.
Yeah.
So, they can follow these things."
Yeah, I mean, I can attest. I still have somewhat encyclopedic knowledge of Bionicle lore even to this day, just because I was passionate about it, you know. And I think like trying to dumb down the story for the sake of marketing, especially like in 2015, is such a strange move. I mean, like the fan base that had grown up on Bionicle, was obviously in an older audience at that point. So introducing it to a new generation, I can understand. The TNG of Bionicle. I don't know, but it really it felt like it missed the mark on a lot of levels, and it really lost the complexity that I think is kind of what made it like a cultural icon. Is that
Yeah.
people loved sinking their teeth into like the complete you know web of shadows of the world building is what people were interested in.
Well,
Um,
I think that's why they didn't want me to work on it,
mm,
because they didn't want that complexity. They didn't want, this complicated story like I had been telling, and the whole epic feel that it always had.
mm,
Um, and I think that's why they chose not to use me. And basically, once they decided they didn't want me on the books, I said, well, then I'll get somebody else to do the magazine work for it, because if you don't want me on it, I don't want to be on it.
yeah.
So, um, I basically just never discussed it online, and just sort of divorced myself from it at that point. But my boss at
Mm,
the time, I was upset not getting to work on it, but my boss at the time said, "Look, you already did this and you were already successful at it. You don't need to do it again.
mm.
It's not necessary for you to be successful at this again. You've already done this." So that was very good advice.
Yeah, and I think you're very well remembered. I mean, when I think back to like the success of Bionicle and I think of like all the books and I think of, your name on them, that's what I still picture is like being immersed in that of that universe and those characters. Um, in Time Trap, which still one of the best out there. Um,
Well, I always like the story of how I got to do the books,
hmm,
because initially I was not doing them.
okay.
A very talented writer named Kathy Hopka,
Yes.
and she's still doing stuff today. She's very, very talented and a very nice person.
Hmm,
But I mean, Lego was not going to push for me to do them because it really wasn't their place to do that.
hmm,
And Scholastic was going to use somebody they'd used before, which is understandable. And because I'd had a few books out, I'd had a few novels out when I was at West End, but they were not aimed at kids. They were aimed at college and older.
hmm.
Um, and I never did really adjust to not being able to kill people. My old books, the bodies were stacked up like cordwood. Um, but um, what happened was in '03, I think it was in June of 2003, we had the plan for Motunui,
Hmm,
or Metro Nui rather, and this whole big change we were going to make in '04. And they had just gotten a new editor for the Bionicle books at Scholastic. So I contacted her, and because I was doing approvals at that
hmm,
point, I was reading the stuff for approvals, and Kathy, all Kathy could really do was adapt the comics because she wasn't part of the story team, she wasn't
hmm,
in house, and so I contacted the editor and I said, look, we got big changes planned for next year. That you're going to need to know about. Do you want me to come down to New York and meet with you and brief you on this stuff? So she said yes. So I went down to New York City,
hmm,
and I met with her and gave her the whole spiel. And she said, well, we want to do one more book this year.
hmm,
We want to tack another book onto the schedule for this year, but we need it really quickly. Would you be able to do it? And if you do a good job, maybe we'll give you more to do.
hmm.
And so that was Tales of the Masks. That was my first one.
Wow.
Um, and I can distinctly remember sitting on my floor in my living room with my laptop on the coffee table writing that book. And and that's how I started doing them, was just because of that. And it was a great situation for a writer because my editor knew nothing about Bionicle. The people in Denmark didn't know anything about Bionicle. I was the only one who knew anything about it. So nobody could read my books and go, oh, well, this is wrong. I don't think I got one change in any book I ever did
Oh
in
my
that
goodness.
series.
Wow.
Because, I mean, I'm sure they made edits for, grammar or whatever, but in terms of story, nobody ever came back and changed anything. It's like I wrote it, and that was it.
That's
And
awesome.
I'm not even sure if the story team was paying attention to what I was doing. But yeah, it was like that. I actually got more back and forth with Ninjago
Hmm, okay.
because the Ninjago plots had to be approved by the story team before I wrote a book. And they were very nice people, and so we would go back and forth and work things out, very amicable. And then when they got replaced was when it was decided that my books weren't canon.
Mm,
So
real? Wow.
yeah, the Ninjago books I did are not regarded as canon, but I don't care because they're
Yeah.
better than what the Ninjago books.
Hey, canon is a state of mind. We can head canon what's really canon if we think about it.
That's
Um,
right.
I remember there. So there was this fascinating argument on the Lego message boards, where in the Bionicle roleplay subform, I think a moderator had declared that death was not canon in Bionicle. And I remember this was so hotly debated. Everyone was like going to the Ask Greg forum and being like, "Hey, is this true? Can you clarify this?" And I'm sure it was just like a liability thing, or they were trying to moderate things in the forum. But it was just such an interesting.
I don't actually don't recall that. I mean, love is not canon, but
Yes, that's very controversial as well, from what I recall.
but but no, I mean, I killed characters. Mavrock got killed.
Yeah,
I
Matoro,
kill characters all the
Sidorak.
time
Yeah.
because that's what I do. Um, you can't have 4 million characters. You got to kill some of them.
Hmm.
Um, Jim Shooter, when he was at Marvel, did a whole initiative of disposing of disposable characters,
Mm. Kind of the red
where he
shirts.
just, yeah, he just, any comic characters, villains, heroes, whoever he felt were too minor, he just got rid of them one way or the other,
Mm.
and then you wouldn't see them for years. But I mean, we did the Red Star thing, but that wasn't because
Yeah.
Death wasn't canon. That was just because I want to do something with the Red Star, and that's what I came up with.
Mm.
Um, because the story team didn't have any plans for it, so I just figured I'll do something with it. But
What was the
um,
plan of the Red Star? Because I remember like there was like this kind of necromancy. They were like uh, the Castora
well,
is what
they
they were
were
called.
they were bringing characters back from the dead,
Hmm.
but they weren't doing it correctly.
Mm.
And then it basically something broke, and they weren't able to send them back anymore. It
Right.
was because the whole idea was you went, you got repaired, you got put back. I mean, it was just a part of the manufacturing
Hmm.
process. But um, something went wrong, and all of a sudden they weren't able to send them back. So you had all of these reanimated dead characters wandering around on this satellite.
Interesting. Like almost like a little zombie sci-fi kind of
Yeah,
concept in a way. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I love to shove different genres into Bionicle.
Hmm. That's
Um,
fun.
that was you can't just do the same thing all the time. And Bionicle is strong enough and rich enough that it can support that.
Yeah.
I remember at the time, before I worked at Lego, but also when I was at Lego, we used to talk about Star Wars a lot.
Hmm.
And I always said Star Wars is missing the boat by not doing horror, not
Mm.
doing murder mysteries, and not doing, because you can do any of that in the Star Wars
Yeah.
universe that you want to do, but all they want to do is the same damn space opera, and only one family is responsible for anything in the entire universe. And I was like, they could do so many different things with this. So, um, um, I never understood why they want to do things like that. But we did when we were doing the Star Wars role playing game at West End.
Mm.
We would do stuff like that sometimes. We did stuff that was like riffing on Forbidden Planet and things
Mm.
like that. We had fun with it. But yeah, they were always very uptight about that sort of thing. So
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's like they're doing it now, like Andor. I mean, there's like a lot of like these
yeah,
Star Wars like
yeah,
short form series coming out. Like The Mandalorian's kind of a space western. Like they're
yeah,
realizing that it's become almost more of its own genre than or its
yeah.
own setting for different genres than simply a singular narrative with a singular feeling, and it's only the Skywalkers, and that's all that matters. Which I haven't even
Well,
seen the last one, but
it's interesting because there's lots of different kinds of science fiction, obviously.
mm,
But when the first book I ever wrote was a science fiction book, and
mm.
that's not really my best genre
What was it
because
called?
I'm not. Huh?
What was it called?
River of God. River of God
River of
was my
God.
first novel,
Okay.
and I was like, well, I want to write this. I'm excited to write this, but I'm not a tech person,
Hmm.
so I'm not going to be able to write a high tech kind of a book.
Mm.
So I wrote a western.
Hmm.
I mean, I wrote that book with the soundtracks from the Clint Eastwood spaghetti westerns playing in my office, and I wrote a western that was basically about the hope for redemption and the impossibility of achieving it.
Mm.
And my ex-wife read that one and said it was the most depressing book she'd ever read in her life. And I said, well, everybody didn't die. One person went insane. I said,
Yeah.
but he's alive. I said, but the whole point of the book was none of these people deserved redemption
Hmm.
for what they had done in their lives.
Yeah.
They thought they could find it, but they weren't going to find it. And so the book was a tragedy from the beginning.
Sure.
Um, and um, that was the only one of my books that my dad read because he used to read it when he went for chemo,
Mm.
and he was gone before my second book came out.
Mm.
But um, it's funny because I tell people about those books that are just used to reading Bionicle, and they're like, "Oh my God, what did you wrote that?" I'm like, "Yeah, I wrote that." Yeah, I remember I was working on my second novel, and the vice president of the company was reading it at West End, and I said, "Well, who do you think is the murderer?"
Hmm.
And he said, "Oh, I think it's this guy," and he was right. And so I wrote a chapter where I had the guy torn in half by a flying tombstone. And then I said, "Now, who do you think is the murderer?"
I mean, that kind of happens, but like someone gets their body cut in half by, I think Toya Tuyet, but she's an empress. She gets cut in half by a portal, you know. So, uh, you know,
Yeah, well, by that time I was able to get away with more. I mean, when we
hmm.
started with Bond, nobody could hit anybody. Everything had to be indirect. It wasn't until we got to the Paraka that they started loosening up, and I could get a little more violent.
Yeah.
But before that, it was like, if you want to stop somebody, you have to shoot at a rock and have the rock fall down, and you couldn't actually just go up and slug them one.
Yeah, kind of like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, you know, thing of they all have all these like bladed weapons, but they can't actually cut anybody with this. They have to like hit them with the flat of their blade, you know, knock them
You
out.
couldn't call them weapons; you had to call them tools.
Oh yeah, Toa tools. That makes so much sense
Yes,
now.
you had to call them tools.
Oh, fascinating. Also, we have about 1 minute left on the Zoom meeting, apparently.
Mhm. All
Okay.
right.
Where did we leave off? Toa tools.
Hmm.
Yeah. So, yeah, it is interesting. Like, so you basically had full free reign on the books later on to the
On the
series, or?
books, yes. But the thing is, the interesting thing with working on something like Bionicle is that, one of the things that helped for me was that a lot of my background when it came to, well, even with the role-playing games, was working for licensed products.
Hmm.
I wrote for Indiana Jones, I wrote for Star Wars, I wrote for Tales from the Crypt, I wrote for Species when I was at West End. Um, did a lot of fun stuff for Tales from the Crypt.
Hmm.
And so you get used to the idea that it's their bat and it's their ball, and you're
Hmm.
just being allowed to play.
Sure.
And Bionicle was very similar to that in that it wasn't mine.
Hmm.
I didn't create it. I didn't own it. I could play with in the universe, but it belonged to somebody else,
Hmm.
and you had to play by their rules. So, you know, I've done a lot of licensed publishing in my life, and and that's not something, frankly, that every writer is able to deal with.
Hmm.
I mean, we had writers, freelancers that we worked with that struggled with it because they wanted to do things the way that they thought they should be done, especially when it came to Star Wars.
Hmm.
And it's like, no, that's not the way they want it done. You just can't do that because you want to. Fortunately, the guy we had working on Star Wars mostly at Lego, Daniel Lipkowitz, ate, slept, and breathed Star Wars and knew everything in the entire world about it. And
Hmm.
so if he did it, you knew it was right. But we ran that with a role playing game company
I can see that.
more than once, you know. So and that's the thing, and it's a case of if you're not willing to play by their rules, then go create your own thing.
Hmm.
You know? Because you can't be doing this stuff has to get approved by somebody. So you can't go too far off the ranch. The main thing with Bionicle was nobody was really approving what I was doing.
Hmm.
So I was the one who was deciding it fit canon or it didn't fit canon.
Yeah.
And when you've got to do when you got to do a 20,000 word book in a little over a month, you better get it right the first time. You don't have time to do second drafts and third drafts. You got to be right the first time.
Hmm. Wow, so like that was like completely first draft, like a lot of those books. Like you just
Oh
banged
yeah,
them out.
they all were.
Wow. Oh my
They all
goodness.
were. I never did a second draft
Wow.
for a Chronicle book. I made, especially with Ninjago, I made revisions because they would come back and go, oh well, can this work better? And in fairness, all the changes I ever got from DC or from paper cuts made the books better.
Hmm.
I never got a bad change from either company,
Hmm.
but I would need to make changes for them, The novels I didn't get changes, and no, there was no time to do you couldn't do a first draft and then send it in and then get changes, and because what changes were you going to get?
Hmm.
They didn't know the story, they didn't know the universe. They weren't going to be able to come back and say, no, you're wrong about this.
Hmm.
So, you know, so unless it was just going to be like, um, you know, a plot thing, but they generally weren't doing that, and they really liked me at Scholastic. I mean, I remember my editor told me that one of the assistant editors was comparing my work to Camus, and
Wow.
I'm like, well, that's interesting because I never read him, so I don't have any idea why you would want to make that comparison. But thank you. Um, but yeah, it was something of a dream being able to just sort of create what you wanted to create and play
Hmm.
with the universe. I mean, not everything was successful. Not everybody liked everything we did, um, but I liked all of it.
I think it's a sign of passion too, like when you have people who are so obsessively fixated like on the lore and how they think the character should act in this moment and how they think, this plot line should go, that they're like kind of arguing about it online, it's really a sign of love. And we see this in like, say like the Star Trek community of people like arguing
Mhm.
about like this show isn't real Star Trek. I don't think this is how it should be. There's something about like that kind of passionate, nerd fan base that I think is what spirals something into like becoming a part of the cultural lexicon. And even today, like over 15 years since Bionicle was officially, Gen 1 that actually people care about, people are still talking about it. I recently
Mm.
saw a 13-hour video about the entire lore of every Bionicle character in obsessive detail, which was a joy to, to watch. Um,
I had a Zoom call in November with a woman from LinkedIn who
mm,
was putting together a website, and she was doing a focus group about it, and so I was doing the focus group with her, and when she realized who I was, she ran off and got her 10-year-old son because
wow.
he had been reading the books.
Oh my goodness.
And so he was so excited to meet me and everything, and she was so excited that I was the one who had done the books and everything. So, and I was like, geez, it was so many years ago.
Yeah,
I
like
can't believe you're
Bi-
still reading it.
Bionicle ended before he was born. Like
Yeah,
that's wild.
yeah,
Wow. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
But
I don't know. Yeah, the fact that Lego didn't keep it going, I mean, I can think of so many stories that could have, continued in that universe. I know you were writing those like those serials that were definitely, going off in their own direction. I loved keeping up with those. Um, you know, I guess if it was still going today, where do you think we'd be at this point?
uh, I don't know. I mean, I think we definitely would have added um, more. We would have explored the fused planet together
Hmm.
a lot more. And we might have moved on to someplace else. I mean, we were going to definitely do things with the great beings. That was my plan.
Hmm.
Um, and um, I really like the concept of these super scientists who were basically thought of as gods by their creations, who basically couldn't do anything right. I like that concept. They were essentially Dr. Frankenstein. They didn't they were doing it because they could do it, but
Yeah.
they didn't really know what they were doing. Um, and who knows? I mean, we might have gotten into a lot of other stuff. I mean, I could easily still be writing this today,
Hmm.
easily, um, because I loved it. I mean, between the comics and the books and the magazine, I was immersed in Bionicle like 24 hours a day for months and months and months and months and months and months and years.
Hmm.
And it was very emotionally very hard to have it end and basically to have that universe ripped away.
Yeah.
That was hard on me. I mean, Ninjago, I liked working on it. I'm proud of what I did for it. It was fun,
Hmm.
but I never had the emotional connection to it. because I wasn't on the story team. I had nothing to do with the direction they were going with it.
Yeah.
I was just coming up with stories and doing them,
It's someone
but
else's baby.
it was totally somebody else's baby. And I was never upset about that. I was never upset that I wasn't on the team for that because it was a totally different kind of thing. And I don't know if they really needed a big team for
Hmm.
that. But it was just a job.
Yeah.
It was a job, and I tried to do my best with it and have fun with it. Um, but it was a job. Whereas, Bionicle was something you lived.
Hmm.
You had to. If you didn't, and I wasn't the only one doing that. I mean, the advanced guys were like that. The set designer was like that.
Hmm.
Everybody involved with it was like that. Because if you didn't approach it that way, you weren't going to do a good job.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it really showed. I mean, like the fact that there was so much passion, on the team is probably why there's so much passion in the community. And there still is. People are still talking about, still buying the books, which is, even without the sets being officially available. Although I know there's a lot of, third market trading. Um, like this story still lives in people's heads. And I think it's definitely a testament to, how much creativity kind of went to it. I am curious though, like, have you been doing any of your own projects, like original fiction? Um,
Yeah, I have a few things that I'm working on. Nothing that's anywhere close to done. I really haven't done much writing the last 3 years, which
hmm,
I should have, but it's hard to settle down and write when you're worried about, keeping the lights on.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, I'm working on a Sherlock Holmes novel.
Hmm,
Um, I'm working on something that's somewhat similar to Blood Shadows, in a little bit of ways. And I think there's a third thing, but I can't remember what it is. But what happens is I get so far and then I stop and then I realize that I veered off track.
hmm,
So I have to go back and erase a bunch of stuff and start over again because if you take characters in directions they don't want to go, they stop cooperating
yeah.
and the book grinds to a halt. And my problem is um I always I move too fast.
Hmm.
I want to get to the crux of the plot fast. And so then I hit like 30,000 words and I basically gotten to the meat of the story and I still have 30,000 words to do.
Hmm.
So, that's now my friend who's in publishing, I was telling her about one of my stories and she was like, "Oh, I don't know if you'll be able to sell that." The big thing now is fantasy romance.
Oh yeah.
I said, you could give me $1 million, I can't write a romance. I just can't. I mean, my romances end with somebody dead. So,
Hmm.
if not both of them, my idea of a romance is double indemnity. So,
Hmm.
I couldn't write that. It would not convince anybody if
Is
I
that the
tried to
reason it
write.
wasn't canon and Bionicle? Or
No, it wasn't canon in Bionicle because we didn't think 8-year-olds wanted to read about romance.
hmm. Makes sense.
10, 11, 12-year-olds want to read about romance, maybe, but the story was supposed to be read by 8-year-olds,
Hmm.
and we didn't think 8-year-olds wanted mushy stuff.
Hmm.
So that was why we decided that that was not worth pursuing.
I've definitely seen many fanfics that might suggest otherwise, but obviously those are people who have kind of grown up from the target audience of the demographic they were going for. Um, but no, yeah, it is interesting seeing like how the kind of tides of viewer preference or reader preference seems to be rolling. But in a way, I feel like because something is like very big in the current age, that also kind of means that I'd imagine there's like a niche hunger for something that's different from the norm of
Well,
like.
the interesting thing I think is that I read a lot. I read a lot, and I read a lot of old stuff, and I read some new stuff. And the biggest difference to me between old stuff and new stuff is that new authors can't write endings.
Hmm.
Um, and I kind of blame Stephen King for that because Stephen King once said that a horror story is essentially you hear something scritch, 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 scritch on the door, scritch, 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 scritch the book, and you build up all this terror, and you're so scared of what's behind the door,
Mm,
and then you open the door, and it's a 10-foot tall cockroach,
yeah.
and he said in there, and you get a scream, and then the next second, the person is saying, "Well, at least it's not a 20-foot tall cockroach."
Interesting.
So his feeling was there was no way to scare anyone with an ending.
Yeah.
That once you show the monster, they're not scared anymore, which is why he never really made an effort to make a good ending outside of maybe Pet Cemetery, which had a
Mm,
good ending. But mystery authors, thriller authors especially, suck at endings.
yeah.
And I can't tell you how many books I've read where the concept was great and they can't stick the landing.
Mm,
And so what I used to do later in Bionicle, when I was getting bored, was I'd write the ending first
mm,
and I'd write the whole book backwards.
fun.
And I was telling my friend about the Sherlock Holmes story I'm doing, and I said, "Well, I know how it ends. I'm having a hard time getting there." And she said, "Well, then go write how it ends, because you
Mm,
know that part, and then just work backwards from there, because maybe it'll come to you while you're writing the ending, how you get there." Um, but I did that. I did that a few times with Bionicle, where I'd write the book backwards just to see if I could do it.
yeah.
Um, but I mean, the thing was, when you're dealing with word counts or page counts, it really makes sense to do the ending first because otherwise you're going to get to the end and you're not going to have enough words left to do the ending you want to do.
Mm,
If you got 20,000 words and you write 18,000 and you get to the end and you need to do a big battle at the end, you're going to have to do it in 2,000 words. It ain't going to work.
yeah.
You need to write as many words as you need to write to do that ending and then adjust everything else to fit.
I do think of the George R. R. Martin paradox, where uh, it seems like the story's ending is completely out of sight because there's so much build up and so much, so many details to keep in mind. I'm not sure if he knows how to end. I mean, I don't want to speculate about his mindset, but I do recall his conversation with Stephen King of asking, "So how do you actually finish books?" And it was fascinating to hear about. But yeah, yeah, that is an interesting approach, and I mean, I think a lot of artists would kill for the level of productivity that you had in those early Bionicle days of like finishing like a book, like banging it out. Um, but obviously, I think there's oftentimes a bit of like perfectionism, which can certainly lead to a lot of procrastination from what I've seen.
You know where that comes from? That comes from not being paid.
Hmm.
If you tell me today you have to do a book and it's due March 1st and you're going to get $6,000 for it, you'll get a book on March 1st.
Yeah.
If you tell me go write this book and I don't know if you're going to get paid or not, then they're not going to get it March 1st.
Hmm.
There's a huge difference between writing when you have a contract and a paycheck waiting at the end than just writing for yourself, which is why it takes me years to do a thing. The other thing that's really interesting, I have a friend who got some YA books published,
Hmm.
and the first book that he had published took him 5 years to write.
Well.
Did very well. So they came right back and they said, "We want a second book in this series, and you have a year."
Hmm.
And this is why so many second books suck because it takes a writer 5 or 6 years to do the first book, and then they only have a year to do the second book
Yeah.
because they want it out. They don't want to wait 5 years for a sequel.
Hmm.
So they have to rush. And that's why a lot of times second books are not as good as first books.
That makes so much sense. Yeah. Also, like, I feel like sometimes those second books are no longer written for the author themselves, but for the audience that they're trying to appeal to, Which, in a strange twist of fate, makes it so it no longer appeals to the audience because they liked it for what the author was enjoying.
Yeah, and also, I mean, if you've got continuing characters and those characters really don't want to do the second book, it's going to
Hmm.
be really hard. I mean, when I did Hell's Feast and Demon's Dream, um, I killed the love interest off in Hell's Feast, and then I planned to have him hook up with somebody else in Demon's Dream, and he just refused to do it
Hmm.
because he was still in love with the girl from the last book.
Hmm.
and he simply was not going to, get involved with anybody else. I couldn't make him do it. I tried to make him do it multiple times. It just wasn't. Every time I did, the book ground to a halt because he was in love with the girl from the set from the first book, and that was just the way all there was to it. So,
That's a really fascinating mindset on writing books too. Is like the characters have their own internal compass that
oh yeah.
try as we might to kind of bend them to our will as like these great beings of some kind, they ultimately will do what they want to do.
Well, this is a that's a big hobby horse of mine,
Mm.
Wes. And I used to drive English teachers crazy when I would do speeches at school about this. But I always describe writing like sleigh riding.
Mm.
You start out going up the hill as you're getting to know your characters. When by the time you know them and you're at the top of the hill, you just zing right down because they're just telling you the story and you're just typing.
Yeah.
So I said, you should know your characters like your best friends.
Mm.
And I said, the example I always gave was like, let's say you and your best friend are walking down the street and you see somebody in trouble. You know what your best friend would do
Yeah.
in the situation. Maybe your best friend would always rush over to help. Okay.
Hmm.
If you try to write the story and you have your best friend just keep walking and ignore them, that's not who they are.
Mm.
Now you don't know what they're going to ever do in any situation because they're not acting like themselves.
Yeah.
So you screw everything up. I had a friend who used to stay up all night just agonizing over the stuff he wrote, and it was because he tried to move the characters like chess pieces to get the plot to go where he wanted it to
Mm.
go, and they didn't want to go there.
Yeah.
You just The best way to write, in my opinion, is to write without an outline.
Mm.
So you're not confined to where everybody's going to do, because sometimes the best stuff you write is the stuff you did not plan to write.
Yeah.
When I did my third book for West End, I named one of the characters after a friend of mine from high school, and I asked her permission first, and I said, this is who she's going to be. She's going to be kind of like, tough but with a heart of gold, but
Mm.
blah blah blah. And after I was finished, I said, well, she didn't really turn out that way. She turned out a pyrokinetic parasite. So, are you still okay with me using your name? Because, she didn't really turn out the way either one of us thought she was going to, but that's who she was.
Mm.
That's just how it worked out. So, um, um, I mean, I remember doing sitting down to do a scene in Hell's Feast. The last chapter had ended with the hero seemingly getting killed, and then the next chapter was going to wake up, and he was going to wake up because he wasn't really killed.
Hmm.
And instead, I ended up writing this really weird chapter, like in the underworld, where he was down there playing pool with a demon, and there was this
Mm.
guy in a corner whittling his wife into a chair, and I don't know where the hell any of that came from, but it was the best part of the book. And
Yeah.
if you're working with an outline, you're not going to write that. You're going to write what's in the outline.
Yeah, I think of like kind of the principles of improv or playing a TTRPG, which I know you've written for them,
Mhm.
is that you can like have everything planned out and it's all in your head and you know exactly how it's gonna go, but then the people you're doing it with will go in a completely different direction,
Yeah.
and you gotta be prepared for that. And if you try to if you try to railroad them into your vision and what you have in mind, it's not going to be a good time.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love how, in a way, your characters are almost like their own little D&D party, kind of on their own adventure,
Yeah.
and you're just guiding them along the way. But you
Yeah.
ultimately don't have as much of a say as maybe we like to think we
No,
do.
they're guy. You may be setting up the situations, but they're deciding how to react to them.
Mm.
Say that's the way that your characters should be your best friends. If they're not, you're going to struggle. Even the bad guys, you have to be able to say, I know this person really well, and I know what they would do in this situation, and I know how they would react in this situation. And so, for example, to get back to Bionicle, the reason I could do Makuta was that was how I knew him to be. It
Mhm.
wasn't the same as how the people who created Bionicle saw him, but that's how I saw him. I saw him as a multi-level thinker.
Yeah.
I saw him as this Machiavellian character who could intellectually run rings around the people that he was up against.
Mm.
Um, and let's face it, he lost in the end because he came out of the shadows and he tried to do something overtly physical and win by physical power, but that's not
Mm.
where his strength lay.
Yeah.
It never was. His strength was his brain, and he probably could have achieved what he wanted without getting into a slugfest. But
Yeah, the Rock'em
he
Sock'em
got put in that
robots.
situation, and once that happened, he was doomed because that
Mm.
wasn't what he was good at.
Yeah, it's funny because he seemed, like as a viewer of the lore, he seemed to go through all these evolutions. Like there was the Montanui online game. He's like this kind of almost force of nature, like eldritch, maybe a little bit like Lovecraftian villain. Um, then he's this big brutish schemer. And then like all these evolutions, like we find out Makuta pterodax is one of a species, which I think the name was a very divisive uh, thing in the community of like, isn't it less intimidating that we know his name is pterodax? I don't know.
Let's see what difference it makes. I mean, yeah, I mean, we did multiple Makuta because they were doing multiple Makuta sets,
Mm,
so that's what we did. Um, but I never saw what difference it made if you knew his name. I
mm,
mean, that's like, I mean, we know Galactus's real name, and it doesn't make Galactus less scary. Um, when they revealed his name was Galen, I don't think anybody went, "Oh, okay, well, Galactus is okay now, so I'm not worried about
mm,
him anymore." It's
mm,
like it made no difference. Um, it's just again, like you said, people have their own head canon, and they don't want things that disrupt that head canon. But even, and this is something I see all the time, and I hear from people that work on franchises, fans don't own the franchises.
mm.
It doesn't belong to them. They can play in the universe, but it doesn't belong to them. They don't get to make those decisions. So,
Yeah, yeah. My headcanon Makuta's name was Jeff, so I was really bummed out by the
mhm.
reveal. Um, yeah, no, it's really fascinating hearing about that writing process. Um, and yeah, obviously, like the industry is in kind of a strange place at the moment. It feels like a lot of creatives are becoming a bit discouraged. Everyone's kind of forced to become an entrepreneur simply because the market is terrible and no one can seem to find employment. Um, I've been following your LinkedIn. I saw your poem recently that you made, um, and I showed it to my friends, and it was very relatable to a lot of folks. Um, how's that experience been?
What, LinkedIn?
Yeah,
LinkedIn is a nightmare.
yeah.
Um, I mean, just today, yesterday, LinkedIn had sent me a job saying, "Oh, this would be a good job for you." And went on, and it had been posted for 17 hours, and they already weren't accepting applications
Oh my
anymore.
goodness.
So I'm like, okay, but it's remote US. So I said, okay. So they sent it to me again today. So then I went and I looked, and it was open. I'm like, cool. So I click on apply, and apply takes me to the company website. But on the company website, the job is on site in Texas. It's
Oh
not
my.
remote US.
Oh my
So I'm like, why the
goodness.
hell does the ad say remote US if it ain't remote? You have to be in Richardson, Texas.
That's ridiculous.
So, what are you wasting my time for? But you see that all the time. You see jobs go remote. This week it's remote US. Tomorrow it's hybrid Ohio.
Hmm.
The third week it's on site in Cincinnati. I mean, they don't even know where they want the person to sit.
Yeah.
So, it's like if you don't even know where the person should sit, maybe you shouldn't be running the ad yet. Um, but the last one I got was I had applied for a creative writer job in December. And last week I got an email from them saying, "Oh, the job is open again
Hmm.
if you want to apply, and you have to do 1,000 word sample, and no AI writing, which is fine because I don't do
Yeah.
that. But you have to write it in this GPT program.
Hmm.
I wrote them and I said, well, why? If you don't want any AI writing, why do you want this written in an AI app? You
Yeah.
know? And they gave me this whole song and dance about how hard it was to get a job there, which wasn't answering my question.
Yeah.
So I wrote the sample in Word. I went today to put it in the app. I can't figure this stupid app out. I mean, I can't even figure out how to change text color on this damn thing.
Hmm.
So I wrote them and I said, well, I did the 1,000 word sample, but I can't make head or tail with this app, so I'm not submitting. And I posted about it on Facebook, and my cousin said, it's probably not even a real job. They probably just want to train their AI model, and they're getting people to write fiction, and then they're going to use that to train the AI model. And that's why they want you to write it in the AI app, because that way they don't have to feed it in themselves.
Yeah.
Um, and it's really a right because while I could use the money, God, the stuff they publish is crap. Oh, it's supposed to be for teenage girls. I showed my daughter. She said, I would never watch this. This is awful. This is just absolutely awful. Unfortunately, the freelance I had been doing, which was with a Chinese company, which didn't pay great, but it was very consistent and they were nice people. I'm not sure if I'm getting more work from them because the last project they gave me, they came back and postponed because of a strategic reallocation.
Hmm.
And so I don't know if I'm going to get more work from them. So right now, I don't have anything to do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like there's so many people who grew up like immersed in your stories and reading your books, and there's obviously still a massive market for them. Um, I feel like you could do your own thing, and people would be thrilled to read it just based on your reputation alone. Obviously, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard to tell. I mean, the third thing I had going on was the thing I was doing in my blog for a while, which was the story about the superhero team that had been basically exiled from their city and disbanded, and having to come back together again because the last foe they fought has come back. And I was pretty pleased with how that was going. I haven't worked on that in a while, but actually that would probably be the easiest thing for me to get published because it's closer to Bionicle in terms of genre than the other stuff I'm doing.
Hmm.
Um, but I don't know which of the three things to work on because I honestly don't know which one has a better chance of ever having anything done with it. So
Mm. Yeah.
I don't know which one is more commercial.
Well, it's always good to put stuff out there, see what sticks. Um, but yeah, I mean, this has just been fantastic. I appreciate you so much, like coming in for the interview. Like you've inspired me as a writer. Like you know, the world of Bionicle has shown me that there's like so much potential for weird ideas that like aren't just like the generic sci-fi and fantasy and superheroes and that's the three genres that exist. It's like
Mhm.
like there's so much creativity out there, and I think people need to be able to kind of foster their own imaginations. Don't rely on some stupid chatbot to do it for you. Actually use your brain and make something. And
Yeah,
that's part of being human.
yeah, yeah. Um, no, I mean there's still stuff to do, and even if there isn't, you take something else and you file the serial numbers off it
Hmm.
and you make it your own, you know. And you have to also remember what my old boss used to say, which is that everything doesn't have to be a Cadillac. Some things can be Volkswagens.
Hmm.
It doesn't have to be perfect as long as it's good. And I always say there are three different kinds of writers. There are really bad writers,
Hmm.
where when you read their books, you say, I could do better than that. So you go right.
Hmm.
There are good writers who you say, this was really good. This inspires me to want to go write. And then there are great writers who are so good that they make you go, there's no point in writing because I'll never be this good.
Hmm. I definitely feel that way reading Terry Pratchett. Uh,
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there are there are writers that are so good that you're just like, not on my best day,
Hmm.
you know. Um, and then there are writers that, like for me, I have certain writers that I consider to be palate cleansers. Like, because if I read a bunch of books that suck, I can always go read a John Dixon Carr, and I know it'll be good,
Hmm.
you know. So I always have my palate cleansers that I can use in case I get a string of really bad books.
Who are your favorite writers? Like, out of curiosity, like in the great writers section of people that either inspire you or inspire you to give up forever, who would you say are the people that you look up to?
Well, my favorite writers right now are, well, Ambrose Bierce, who's been a favorite writer of mine since high school.
Hmm.
S.J. Perlman, John Dixon Carr. I like Paul Holter when he's on. When he's not on, he sucks. But when he is on, he does some amazingly fantastic stuff.
Hmm.
That you just get there, sit there reading it with your mouth open, like, where did you even come up with this? You know,
Yeah.
what could you think to mix this stuff together? Um, I'm trying to think of who else I really like. Um, it depends on the mood. I mean, I read Rex Stout. I mainly read mysteries.
Hmm.
That's mostly almost all the fiction I read is mysteries.
Hmm.
Um, and I still read some nonfiction, not as much as I used to read. But I mainly read mysteries, and there's some good ones out there, modern ones like Louise Penny is good. Donna Leone is good, except that the bad guy never gets caught at the end,
Hmm.
um, which is a little frustrating. Um, I'm trying to remember who it was. There's one other writer who does. She does. I don't remember what her name is, but she does books where the subordinate character in book one is the main character in book two, and the subordinate character in book two is the main character in book three.
Oh.
But she'll write a book that is so freaking fantastic that you'll be like, "Oh my God, this is absolutely amazing what she did with this book," and then the next book is awful. There's no consistency in her work at all.
Hmm.
Um, um, and that, but the best books a lot of times, Jeremy Levin is a favorite of mine, although he only did two books. He did a book called Creator, and he did a book called Satan, His Psychotherapy and Cure.
Hmm.
Um, the second book was not as good as the first, although I do always like the part at the end where Satan has made a deal with a psychiatrist that in return for therapy, he will tell him the great secret.
Oh, that's fun.
And at the end, it turns out that the great secret is what is hell? And the answer is this is it. If you're bad, you go here.
Hmm. Ah, like
Now,
Earth is the real
Earth
punishment.
is hell. Yes,
That's
Earth is
fun.
where you go if you're bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe Earth or LinkedIn or something like
Yeah.
that.
So, that was basically he was depressed because God had written all the books.
Hmm.
So he felt he had gotten a bad image as a result of that. But Creator was a great book because it dealt a lot. It basically was about a scientist who was writing a novel. And so half the book was his life and half the book was the novel he was writing.
Hmm.
And the conflict between him and his main character. And it was sort of a religious parable in that his character says to him, "You want me to love you, but you couldn't make it that I love you because then it wouldn't mean anything.
Hmm.
So you had to give me free will for it to mean anything, but that means I might not love you."
Wow.
Um, it was a really, really good book. Really good book. I read that when I was in high school, and it's still stuck with me to this day. That book.
What's it
And I
called?
did a term, Creator,
Creator. Okay.
and I did a term paper about it. Because I knew my teacher hadn't read it, so she couldn't very well come back and say I did it wrong. Um, and because it starts out like you're not gonna like it. It starts out like with all this like sex scenes and stuff, and I was like, I don't like this. I don't. This isn't really my thing.
Hmm.
But then as you get further into it, it gets to be a much better book. because the scientist is mourning for his late wife and is trying to clone her in a kiddie pool.
Hmm.
Um, and so he's dealing with all of that, and then the his character is dealing with his marriage and the death of his wife, and it's just a marvelous story. And at the end of the book, if I recall correctly, you find out that the novel character is actually the writer and the scientist is actually the fictional character.
Wow. That's a fun
Basically, because
twist.
the novelist wanted somebody to blame for all the things that had gone wrong in his life.
Hmm.
And again, that's where the whole religious parable of if God didn't exist, man would have invented him come from. Because the whole idea is um, if there was no God, you would have to invent a God to blame him for the things that didn't go right in your life.
That makes sense, yeah. Yeah. Oh, what a fun concept. Yeah, in a way, there's a bit of a bit of parallel there with Bionicle too. I feel. I mean, the whole of Mont Nui is in reality like this kind of giant robot that's very apathetic, doesn't actually care, but they have this whole kind of belief system set up around him.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's fascinating. Um, yeah, interesting. Also,
I always recommend that book to people that write.
I'll have to check
It-
it out. Oh, god damn it. Hey, so at this point we were having some major technical issues and found ourselves unable to resolve them, so we decided to end the interview there. I did ask Greg after the fact if there's anywhere that people can find him. He said no. So if you'd like to check up on what Greg's been up to, I guess stay tuned and see if he releases anything to the public. You can follow him on LinkedIn for his very insightful discussions on the nature of the job industry and recruiters and hiring scams. I find them deeply relatable, and it makes me feel less alone to read those. As well as that, there is the official Greg archive where you can see about 20 years of him answering questions for the Bionicle community, which is absolutely insane. The amount of effort he put into doing so, and I appreciate him so much for that. Is one of those people who's asking so many lore and world building questions about the series. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much to Greg for coming on for the interview. And I will see you all next time. Bye, Bionicle.